Welcome to Vote 2014. I'm Sandy Jacobson. On today's program, we will be covering Ballot Measure HH. We'll be talking with two designated proponents and two designated opponent speakers. After I give a brief summary of the ballot measure, each side will make an opening statement. We will then have a discussion about the ballot measure, and each side having an equal opportunity to present their viewpoints. At the conclusion of our discussion, each side will make a closing statement. With me today as Measure HH proponents are Gleam Davis and Ted Winterer. Welcome, Gleam and Ted.
Thank you.
Our ballot measure HH opponents are Bob Selden and Don Gray. Thank you for being with us, Bob and Don.
Thank you.
Measure HH is accompanied on the ballot by Measure H, which was placed on the ballot by the City Council and proposes to raise local City of Santa Monica revenues by increasing the real estate transfer tax charged and received by the City of Santa Monica. Measure HH is a non-binding advisory measure. It asks voters if the city should use the transfer tax revenue granted by Measure H to preserve, repair, renovate, and construct affordable housing for low-income people who work or live in Santa Monica, including seniors, veterans, working families, and persons with disabilities. If the transfer tax measure is passed, the outcome of the vote on the advisory question may guide the City Council in deciding how to use the transfer tax revenue. However, the City Council will not be legally bound by the outcome of the vote on the advisory measure. The City Council could decide to use the transfer tax for any lawful city purpose that best serves the city's needs. Now we're going to have a 1-minute discussion or opening statement. We'll start with Gleam Davis as a proponent for ballot measure HH.
Thank you, Sandy. Measure HH would advise the City Council that it is the will of the people that new revenue from Measure H be used for the preservation and production of affordable housing. Market forces and state laws that have weakened rent control have made housing increasingly unaffordable for the majority of Santa Monicans. Today, a family in Santa Monica with median income can afford to pay about $1,700 per month in rent, but the median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is about $2,500. And of course, half the households in the city earn less than the median income, so they are even more challenged to be able to afford to live here in Santa Monica. Measure H is advisory and simply directs the City Council to address the housing crisis so Santa Monicans can continue to reside in our city. Affordable housing reduces traffic, cuts greenhouse gas emissions, helps alleviate homelessness, especially among veterans, allows seniors to age in place with dignity, and enables kids to learn better in school.
Thank you, Gleam. And Bob, you're going to do the opening statements for the opponents.
Thank you, Sandy. Proposition HH is bad for all residents. It's merely a way to fund more development at a time when we've begun to take our city back. The city is always pushing for greater building height, greater densification, more water use, more power use, and greater congestion. And these projects are projects over which residents have no control. There's no public oversight. The city has already excluded these projects from public review. The city's zoning code gives these projects height and density bonuses and reduced parking requirements. You have no say in what goes next door to you. You have no say in the size, the design, the density, the required parking. This development displaces tenants. You just have to look at High Place and the Village Trailer Park to see the tenants have been displaced. There's no financial oversight. The city housing director can spend $15 million per project. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me start by saying, how do you actually define affordable housing?
Well, affordable housing is defined within the law as a certain percentage of median income, and then you assume that a family should pay no more than 30% of their median income, of that income, in rent. And then you can have levels within that. So for example, a family who's paying 30% of the median income may be at the high end. There are some people that can only afford 10 to 20% or who only make 10 to 20% of the median income, and obviously rents are much lower for them. So there's a range of ways to define affordable housing, but it's basically set forth in our Affordable Housing Production Plan as well as in state law.
When you talk about the development that you expect will occur if HH passes, H and HH pass, why do you assume that it will be big?
Well, the housing production staff of the city's made it clear that increased density is the way to go for the future. They've taken several steps that have not made the city a better place to live and degraded the quality of life in their effort to squeeze more housing in, due to the cost mainly. But which is interesting because statistically, there are indications that that's the complete wrong direction for our city, and that what we need is actually more worker force housing that might be smaller, for instance, and less dense. And so we have no say over that through HH.
So do you foresee that the projects that you would build for affordable housing would necessarily be, for example, part of a two-tier type of housing, affordable housing mixed in with current rate apartments?
No, when we do public financing of affordable housing, we go about it two ways. About 60% of the funds have historically been used to take existing rental buildings and renovate and rehabilitate them and adaptively reuse them, allowing the existing tenants to stay in place. And as vacancies come online, those become deed-restricted affordable housing units. So to the issue of whether or not these funds and the affordable housing program create overdevelopment, since 60% of the funds are used to just preserve existing buildings that will not be redeveloped for 55 years at the minimum. That's not overdevelopment, that's not development at all. But when we do new construction, you take any parcel in Santa Monica where it might conceivably be an affordable housing project. We can't downzone by state law. And any housing project that comes before us by state law that conforms with the existing zoning, we have to approve.
Let me just interrupt you. What does downzoning mean?
I mean, reducing the zoning envelope, saying that instead of being able to go to 45 feet, you can only go to 32 feet, or instead of being able to build 40 units, you can only build 20 units. You can't do that in our state. The state of California acknowledges that we have a housing crisis, both affordable housing and market rate housing in the state. There's just not enough housing for everybody, which is why the prices have gone up in the basic supply and demand theorem. If there's not enough supply and the demand is there, the prices go up.
But there's no crisis locally, Ted. We've more than exceeded our requirements as a city. We've outperformed cities combined with our own local housing provisions. And so that's what you can throw around the term crisis, but you got to define what a housing crisis is.
I'll tell you what's defined. In 1998, there were 30,000 residences in the city which were affordable to low and moderate incomes. 15 years later, that number shrunk almost 100% to 18,000 residences. So we have had, because of Ellis Act evictions and because of vacancy control, a lot of our previously affordable rent-controlled housing is no longer affordable to people. We have a median income in the city of $68,000. If you want to pay for a 3-bedroom apartment in the city at the median rent that's available out there right now, you have to earn $126,000 a year to be able to pay for that.
Well, it's nice to talk about earnings and cost, but on the other, if we're just talking sheer numbers, the Santa Monica Daily Press reports redevelopment agency or no redevelopment agency, Santa Monica managed to add 246 affordable multifamily residents in fiscal year 2012-13. It was the second most in the city's recorded history. That doesn't sound like a crisis to me.
It's a crisis because we no longer have the money from the state, right? We used to get $15 million a year from the state to finance affordable housing. Those 246 units were financed by the redevelopment agency funding, okay? So now we no longer have that money.
You're talking the way in which we finance the production.
What do you mean it wasn't from the state? We know that Sacramento has withheld $68 million. Right?
Well, no, that's not how that happens, Sandy. For years, we withheld money through the redevelopment agencies that was due to the state. And we talked about this when we discussed parcel taxes for the schools. And that we were saying the school should sue the city and to provide that money for the state so we could finance our schools. And that's exactly what Brown did when he did away with the redevelopment agencies. The financing for the schools went way up.
Right, but the financing for affordable housing went way down. And it is true that we've been very successful in the past because of our use of redevelopment funds as well as a robust housing trust fund to be able to produce over and above what the voters of Santa Monica in 1990 said they wanted, which is that 30% of new housing be affordable housing. That's in the charter of the city of Santa Monica. The problem is we've exhausted the redevelopment funds that we had because the state took back most of them and we used what we had left over. And our housing trust fund, which we used to which we replenished from the redevelopment agency, is now gone. So there is no prospect for producing any affordable housing, whether it's produced by the rehabilitation and repair of existing buildings or by the construction of new housing.
You meaning production of housing that the city has control over. Market rate housing, they're bound by those same rules. When you build an apartment building, you're required to have a certain number of low-income housing.
But that's anywhere from 5 to 20%. That doesn't meet our charter requirement of 30%. Plus, it's extremely difficult to get the market rate. It's extremely difficult to get market rate housing developers to do the extremely low income housing that requires special services. That's the only way we can get homeless off the street. That's the only way we can deal with severely disabled people. It's the only way we can deal with battered women. We need that public financing with those sort of goals.
If that's the only way, then we're in trouble, frankly, because there's the housing element itself says that we have to find ways to fund this, seeing that the redevelopment agencies were going to be dismantled. And they said we have to find stable funding for this in the future. And all you've managed to do as a city is come up with go to the same well of the parcel tax for the homeowners. It's
but this isn't
discouraging.
a parcel tax.
This is not a parcel tax, Don.
It's
parcel
a
tax is paid
on the
annually.
parcel.
A parcel tax is paid once every year. This is paid only on a transaction, a sale of a residential or commercial property. But we are talking about Measure H now. We're supposed
parcel.
to.
So you're splitting
No, it's a
hairs.
completely different thing, Don. And we're supposed to be talking about HH, not H.
Right, Bob. But the viewers should know that, as I said in my introduction, H and HH are linked together. So we're going to be talking on another show. We talk on another show about H. This is just the non-binding advisory. Bob, you started to say something?
Yes, I wanted to make a couple of points. You mentioned that units have been Ellised and decontrolled, and that was responsible for affordable housing disappearing. But those units still exist. In fact, there may be more units there because places were knocked down and rebuilt. And so we still come back to the density issue. And there's a certain aspect of this where whether it's low income or very low income or not, it's still people, and they have cars and they're using water and they're using electricity. And it seems to me there needs to be a limit on growth. We have a certain infrastructure. We have to live within that infrastructure. And the quality of life is dependent upon living within that infrastructure. And it's unfortunate about Ellising and decontrol, but that's a state issue. We still need to maintain life as it is for our current residents. That should be your primary responsibility. There was also a statement made about zoning compliance, and that these projects are going to comply with zoning, but it ignores the fact that they all get they get density bonuses, they get height bonuses, they get lesser parking requirements, and that affects quality of life and what goes on in the neighborhoods. And so what's happening is we're focusing on what is mostly, in my opinion, from what I've seen, people that don't live in Santa Monica that unfortunately need assistance against the quality of life of people that are already here and to whom I think you own your primary allegiance.
But part of the problem is
We're seeing 94,000 people.
We're seeing a big increase in applications for Ellis, and as the economy continues to recover and there's more opportunities.
We're actually seeing a decline in Ellis applications, Ted.
Well, all I know is that I hear every day from people. I just heard from somebody on the north end of town, north of Montana, an apartment building there. Their apartment is for sale. They saw realtors walking around with plans to tear it down, redevelop it. It's a historic courtyard building that fits in with the character of our city. The more we can preserve those buildings with affordable housing funds, the more we can keep the fundamental character and charm of our neighborhoods.
So you're proposing taking those rights, apparently that you say we have no way to deny people rights to do that kind of activity. You're talking about taking those rights.
We're talking
from
about buying the building for them at a price that can be negotiated.
That's right. It's important to remember that 60% of the money that's been used in the past has been used to repair and rehabilitate existing building, which allows people like seniors to age in place with dignity. And when you talk about serving people who live in Santa Monica, unfortunately here in Santa Monica, we have people who live here but are homeless. For example, disabled veterans. And this is the kind of money that will be raised through Measure H that, and if HH passes, that we can do things like build transitional housing for those people. So we will be helping our residents. We'll be helping our homeless residents become housed residents, which is, I believe, a major value in Santa Monica, and I think will improve our quality of life for everybody.
How do you measure the need for continuing affordable housing?
Well, I can tell you that when the city's head of the Department of Economic Development and Housing came to us, just with regard to people who currently live in Santa Monica or who work in Santa Monica and need affordable housing, we know there are over 3,000 households that need housing here in Santa Monica, that are housing challenged, either because they're paying too much of a percentage of their income in rent or because they simply don't have adequate housing available to them.
How would you respond to that?
I would say,
Well,
money is not a shortage. Money is not in shortage here in the city for housing. The city is reluctant to spend any of their own money to provide housing. And you both admit the city doesn't build housing. They'll loan money to an independent investor to build housing. And if we can't attract that, no amount of money on the city's part is going to take care of that.
There are plenty of not-for-profit providers, housing developers lined up for any loans we can make available to them.
And how much will HH or H bring in that HH would dictate that we should spend on that? What's the estimate for that?
It's anywhere from $4 to $10 million because since it's only assessed when you buy or sell property, it's not assessed on an annual basis, it's volatile. It will change from year to year, but looking historically at what we would have gained, it will be anywhere between $4 to $10 million.
Well, I see two issues. Number one is we don't know what the breakout is of residents versus non-residents because I don't think those statistics are really provided anywhere. There's no oversight. There's no way to audit. So, you give us certain numbers, we look at it, and we don't know if it's true or it's not. And I suspect that the number of Santa Monica residents being serviced in this way are in the minority. The second issue is that the homeless veteran program, I think, is it feels warm and fuzzy, but I think there's other programs that take care of homeless veterans. I think Bobby Shriver was active in one of them recently. There's money available. And the third thing, of course, is that the source of the money, which we'll get into in H, seems to me to be a little lopsided. If this is truly a community goal, the funding source is problematic.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to have to wrap it up here so I can give each of you a chance at a closing statement. Ted, you're going to close for the
Sure.
proponents.
So with rising housing costs, many Santa Monica residents are challenged to afford to live here. In 1998, we had 30,000 residences affordable to low and moderate income households. By 2013, that number had shrunk to 18,000 residences, almost half of what it was 15 years earlier. The city's affordable housing funds preserve existing buildings and create new 2 to 3 bedroom apartments for families. This housing is a lifeline to low-income seniors, veterans, disabled individuals, and working families. In addition, affordable housing preserves our diversity, reduces traffic by eliminating long commutes, improves our carbon footprint, helps to address homelessness, and yields better educated kids in our school system. And affordable housing most certainly doesn't contribute to overdevelopment. Most affordable housing is generated by adaptively reusing existing buildings, which will then not be redeveloped. And when new housing is constructed, it is on parcels where market rate housing, unaffordable to most, would otherwise be built. But most importantly, it keeps Santa Monicans in Santa Monica. Measure HH is endorsed by many organizations, elected officials, and individuals, including the Santa Monica Malibu School Board and the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica. A vote for Measure HH shows that we care about our own.
Thank you very much, Ted. And John, you're going to close for your side.
Thanks, Sandy. There's a reason that 2 council persons are seated next to us, and especially 2 that in the past have criticized ballot box democracy, is because this is toothless. The League of Women Voters and the registrar even says this is merely advisory, there's no impact behind it. But what we need is a steady income-producing future for the housing program, and this doesn't provide it. There's an old saying that, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that's what's happening now. It's the time we should develop a new approach to housing, something that maintains a lower density that suits our needs, But all that this proposal does is try to fit money into a new reality, significantly less money, and then send it to loss of control, lack of citizen oversight, lack of the protections that a tax measure usually has. They're asking us to give that up as citizens. And I urge you to vote no.
Thank you very much, Don. I'd like to thank our proponents and opponents for Ballot Measure HH for being here today. For more Santa Monica election programming, go to smvote.org or watch Cable 99 for Vote 2014 election programming that is on 24 hours per day until Election Day. I'm Sandy Jacobson, and remember to get out and vote on November 4th.